It wasn't the collagen. That was the first thing I ruled out. Collagen loss thins your skin, makes it translucent, changes its texture, but it doesn't pull your cheekbones downward. So collagen was off the list. Gravity came next, the usual suspect. Except gravity acts uniformly on every tissue in your face. And if gravity alone were responsible, the lower face and the upper face would descend at the same rate. They don't. The midface drops faster and further than the forehead. Gravity doesn't explain that asymmetry. Fat pad migration was third. The malar fat pad shifting inferiorly with age. Legitimate phenomenon, documented thoroughly. But fat pads migrate along paths determined by the tension environment they sit in. Something is creating the tension environment. When I eliminated those three, what remained was a structure most people never associate with their face: your calf. Specifically, the deep compartment of your calf, the soleus, the tibialis posterior, and a continuous fascial tract that runs from there all the way to the base of your skull. That track is why a 90-second release at your lower leg can change the tissue mobility in your midface. The word I keep reaching for is connected, but that's not precise enough. Interwoven is closer. These structures are interwoven through a single, unbroken fascial sheet. Before I walk you through the anatomy of why that's true, let me give you the release itself. Protocol first, mechanism after. Because you can start this tonight and feel the difference in your own tissue before you need to understand a single thing about fascial trains. 3 contexts. Pick the one that matches your body right now. If you can stand comfortably against a wall, face the wall, place both palms flat at shoulder height. Step your right foot back about 2 feet. Here is the critical part. Keep that back heel down and bend the back knee. Most calf stretches target the gastrocnemius, the superficial muscle, by keeping the knee straight. Bending the knee bypasses the gastrocnemius and loads directly into the soleus, which is the deep muscle, the one that feeds into the fascial line we're after. Hold this position for 45 seconds per side. During those 45 seconds, let your body weight sink. Don't push, don't bounce. Let gravity do the loading. You will feel a deep, dull ache behind your shin bone, lower than where most calf stretches register. That location matters. It tells you the soleus is engaged, not the gastrocnemius. Switch sides. Total time, 90 seconds. If standing is uncomfortable or your balance isn't reliable, sit on the floor with your legs extended. Place a tennis ball or lacrosse ball under your right calf, positioning it about 1/3 of the way up from your ankle. Let the weight of your leg rest on the ball. Slowly rotate your foot, clockwise for 20 seconds, counterclockwise for 20 seconds, while the ball presses into the deep compartment. Move the ball slightly higher. Repeat. 2 positions per leg, 45 seconds per side. Total time, 90 seconds. If getting on the floor is difficult, sit in a firm chair. Cross your right ankle over your left knee. Use both thumbs to press into the inner border of your right shin bone, about 4 inches above the ankle. Press firmly and hold for 10 seconds. Then move up 1 inch and press again. Work your way up the inner border of the tibia. That's where the soleus attaches, and the pressure reaches the deep compartment without requiring any floor work. 4 to 5 positions per leg, 45 seconds per side. Whichever version you choose, do it daily. Same time each day. I'll give you the specific ritual anchor at the end. For now, the protocol is the foundation. Everything I'm about to explain will make more sense because you'll have the physical reference point in your own tissue. Here is where the mechanism lives. Thomas Myers, who mapped fascial continuities in a system he calls anatomy trains, identified a structure called the deep front line. Most anatomy education treats muscles as individual units. The soleus does this, the psoas does that, the diaphragm does this other thing. Myers' contribution was demonstrating that these muscles are connected by continuous fascial sheaths that transmit force across enormous distances. The deep front line begins at the plantar surface of your foot. It runs through the deep posterior compartment of the calf, which includes the soleus and tibialis posterior. From there, it continues through the adductors of the inner thigh, into the psoas, the deep hip flexor that connects your lumbar spine to your femur, then through the diaphragm, along the pericardium surrounding the heart, up through the scalene muscles of the neck, and into the base of the skull. One line, unbroken fascial continuity from sole to skull. Carla Stecco's dissection work at the University of Padua has provided some of the most detailed imaging of these fascial continuities. Her lab demonstrated that the deep fascia isn't simply wrapping around individual muscles. It forms continuous planes that cross joints and span regions. When you shorten one section of a fascial plane chronically, which is exactly what happens when the soleus stays in a contracted position for years, the tension doesn't stay local. It propagates along the plane. The fascia is a tensional network, and like any tensional network, load applied at one point distributes across the entire structure. Let me widen that claim, because the implications go further than the calf. Every structure along the deep front line is affected by chronic shortening at any single point. Your breathing is affected because the diaphragm sits on this line. Your hip mobility is affected because the psoas sits on this line. Your jaw tension is affected because the cranial base, where the line terminates, is the posterior attachment site for muscles that control mandibular position. When I started paying attention to the deep front line in practice 7 years ago, I expected to find localized effects. What I found instead was systemic pattern change. That 7-year observation window matters. In the first year of incorporating deep front line assessment into my work, the pattern I noticed was simple. People with chronically short calves tended to have restricted breathing. Interesting, but not conclusive. Correlation, possibly coincidence. By year 3, the pattern had more texture. Restricted calves, restricted breathing, and a specific quality of facial tissue tension, a heaviness in the midface that didn't correspond to age, body composition, or skin quality alone. The midface tissue felt tethered, dense, as though something below were pulling it inferiorly. By year 5, I had started incorporating the Soleus release, the same protocol I just gave you, into sessions that had nothing to do with the calf. Shoulder work, jaw work, breathing optimization, and the consistency of what followed was difficult to dismiss. Within 10 minutes of a deep Soleus release, tissue mobility in the midface changed, palpably, measurably, if you used a simple skin pinch test at the nasolabial fold before and after. 7 years is a long observation window. Across hundreds of sessions, the pattern held. Tight soleus correlates with reduced midface tissue mobility. Release the soleus, midface tissue mobility improves within a single session. Repeat daily for 14 days, the improvement becomes the new baseline. Repeat daily for 90 days, the tissue quality change is visible in photographs without any manipulation of lighting or angle. I want to be specific about what visible means, because vague claims about facial change are the currency of an industry I have very little respect for. Visible means the nasolabial fold softens by approximately 1 to 2 millimeters of depth. Visible means the malar region, the cheekbone area, sits slightly higher in photographs when measured from the tragus of the ear to the most prominent point of the cheekbone. Visible does not mean you will look 20 years younger. Visible means the tissue stops being pulled downward by tension originating 2.5 feet below your face. The distinction matters. Renaissance sculptors understood something about tension lines that modern anatomy has only recently rediscovered. When Michelangelo carved the David, he didn't model individual muscles in isolation. He modeled tension relationships between muscle groups. The slight twist of the torso creates a visible line of tension that runs from the right calf through the hip, across the torso, and into the left shoulder. Art historians have debated whether this tension was anatomically accurate or artistically stylized. Stecco's dissection work suggests Michelangelo was anatomically precise. The spiral fascial lines he carved into marble correspond almost exactly to the myofascial meridians mapped 5 centuries later. Those sculptors, working from direct observation of cadavers and living models, saw what the anatomical textbook tradition later obscured by cutting the body into isolated regional chapters. They saw continuity. Lines of force that crossed joint boundaries and connected distant regions into single functional units. The transportation parallel is equally instructive. Early suspension systems in horse-drawn carriages used leaf springs, individual metal strips that absorb shock independently at each wheel. Each spring was its own unit. Ride quality depended on 4 separate components working in isolation. When automotive engineers developed interconnected suspension systems in the mid-20th century, they discovered that connecting the wheels through a shared tensional network dramatically changed how load was distributed. A bump at one wheel was distributed across all 4. The vehicle moved as a unit rather than as 4 independent corners. Your body's fascial system operates on the interconnected model. A change in tension at the calf distributes along the deep front line exactly the way a road impact distributes through interconnected suspension. The soleus isn't an isolated spring. It's one node in a body-wide tensional network. This is where the dread should settle in, and I mean that. Because if what I've described is accurate, in the anatomical evidence, the dissection evidence, the clinical observation evidence, and the self-experiment evidence all converge on the same conclusion, then the implication is that every year you've spent in shoes with an elevated heel, every decade you've spent sitting in chairs that shorten your posterior chain, every compensated step you've taken with a restricted ankle has been progressively tightening this line, pulling your midface inferiorly, restricting your breathing, compressing your hip, millimeter by millimeter, year by year, in a process so slow that you attributed the results to aging rather than to accumulated mechanical tension. The cosmetic interventions people seek for midface heaviness, fillers, threads, surgical lifts, all address the tissue at the site of the symptom. None of them address the tension originating 2.5 feet below. Filling a face that's being pulled downward by fascial tension is like inflating a tire that's being dragged along the ground. The air doesn't solve the drag. Release the drag first, then assess what remains. What remains is often surprisingly little. What was interpreted as volume loss or tissue descent was frequently tension-mediated compression that resolves when the inferior pull is released. I should reroute here. I was going to talk about the timeline for reversal, but there's something more important first. Why this particular muscle and not any other point on the line? The soleus is the access point because of its architecture. It's a pennate muscle, meaning its fibers run at an angle to the tendon, which gives it enormous capacity for sustained contraction. The soleus is sometimes called the skeletal muscle pump of the lower leg because it contracts constantly during standing to push venous blood back toward the heart. Constant contraction means constant shortening stimulus. Constant shortening means chronic tension fed into the deep front line at its lowest accessible point. The soleus is where the tension accumulates because the soleus is the muscle that never fully rests during waking hours. Release here, and you release at the source. Now the timeline. 14 days of daily 90-second releases produces the first measurable change. Tissue pinch test at the nasolabial fold shows increased mobility. 30 days produces the first change others notice, though they usually can't articulate what's different. They say, "You look rested," or "Did you change something?" 90 days produces the change visible in photographs. These timelines come from my own practice observation. They are not randomized controlled trial data, and I won't pretend they are. What I will say is that the consistency of the pattern across years of observation is difficult to explain through placebo or expectation alone, particularly because most of the people I work with had no expectation that a calf release would affect their face. They came for ankle mobility or knee pain. The facial change was incidental, observed, documented, and eventually investigated because it kept appearing where it shouldn't have. Something shifts when you understand this, the quiet shift, the one where you stop looking at your face in the mirror and feeling a dull helplessness about time winning, and you start seeing a tension pattern you can influence with your own hands in 90 seconds every single day without buying anything or booking anything or asking anyone's permission. That shift is the one that matters more than any millimeter of tissue change, because it moves you from the category of person who watches things happen to their body into the category of person who intervenes silently, consistently, with the kind of patience that comes from understanding the mechanism rather than hoping for a miracle. Here is your ritual. Tonight, when you take off your shoes, that is your trigger. Shoes off means Soleus release. Whichever version matches your body, wall, ball, or thumbs. 90 seconds, every single night. The shoe removal is the anchor because it already happens. You're attaching a new action to an existing behavior, which is how rituals survive past the first week of motivation. After 14 nights, do the tissue pinch test yourself. Gently pinch the skin at your nasolabial fold between thumb and forefinger and feel the mobility. Compare it to tonight. After 30 nights, look at a photograph from today beside a photograph from then. After 90 nights, you will have your own evidence, not mine, not a study's, yours. And the process of elimination that started this conversation will have ended where it always does, with the thing you can do rather than the thing you can buy. Shoes off, 90 seconds, tonight.